Hello, my name is Sharifin Gardner. My father, Rolf Gardner, was talking about upland catchment management in the 1960s. Why has it taken decades and only in really recent years is key scientific attention that you've been describing being paid to this? What can be done to accelerate it?
I touched on the fact that we're really up against cultural issues here. So it's a really tricky one to issue, and I would urge you to come to the second workshop tomorrow at 2 o'clock when we're going to go into depth into these issues. That there is no single answer, I'm afraid.
I think some of the problems that Brent highlighted, those farmers came together as a group, so it was definitely a bottom-up approach. They led. But one thing they found was that the agri-environment schemes there, and I'm not too au fait, but I think it was Tir Goffal in Wales, were not fit for purpose for what they were trying to do. One of the big problems with planting woodland on farms is that as soon as you start to do a shelter belt, what happens is it becomes forestry. In the good old days of single farm payment, which are soon to finish, you had to take your single farm payment off that land. You had to put it in a farm woodland scheme. You had to then get effectively your single farm payment back, but it was by then called a farm woodland grant. And all of the bureaucracy was just not geared to integrating woodland into a farm situation. So we've got the new countryside stewardship coming in England. There are opportunities there. It's supposed to be more focused towards providing some element of flood attenuation as part of it, and you should be able to integrate that more easily. That's a simple financial reason why a lot of people didn't incorporate woodland into their farms. The other thing is clearly well prices, and if you've got wheat pouring out of your ears at nearly £200 a tonne, then why would you plant trees? On the other hand, if it's down to £105 a tonne and you possibly face the loss, as I think you should, of some of your basic payment, then things begin to stack up a little bit more towards planting woodland.
Thank you. Question, Dave.
I've got a question for Chris Stoke. Chris, it's about earthworms. When you herbicide vegetation to stop ploughing, which is going to be good for the earthworms, what's the effect on the earthworms? Because aren't they going to be ingesting that herbicided vegetation? I've often wondered. If you could answer it, that would be great.
We have one field at Loddington that we've been looking at for a number of years, applying that approach, and we've seen increases in earthworm numbers there. So we've seen an increase in earthworm, increase in soil structure, an increase in earthworms, and our previous work showed that the approach has an increase in soil microbial biomass as well. Now, that's not to say that there aren't other approaches which might have greater benefits, but we are where we are, and we want to appeal to as many farmers as possible to make a change towards better soil management, and that is the approach we're taking at the moment, and that's proven to be very effective.
Thank you. Question over here. The man on the mic's keeping fit.
Thank you. My question's also to Chris. How do you measure microbial biomass or bacterial biomass?
By collaborating with people who know how to do it. Collaboration is the key to everything we do. And as I said, much of the work we do is sometimes it's through full-blown research projects, and sometimes it's through co-supervised postgraduate students. And the results, the graph I presented was based on a master's project with master's student with Cranfield University. So we're doing an enormous, I've only touched on the range of activity that we're doing. It's enormously varied. It includes social sciences as well as the natural sciences within our small team, let alone me alone. We don't have the expertise to do all that. But basically, it's a measure of soil respiration. That's what it is. So that's it's not actually directly measuring biomass. It's using respiration as a proxy for biomass.
Thank you. Question over here. And Kate's going to ask this question. Kate's from Herefordshire, where I'm from, and she might want to just say a little bit what she does as well, working with farmers, along with her question, which I'm sure is going to be awkward.
Thanks, Russell. Kate from the Biomass Foundation in Herefordshire. We're actually working with Coed Cymru, delivering similar objectives to Pontbren. Do you think that it's possible to replicate Pontbren at a more broad scale without having to make it financially incentivised or through influencing policy as you do with your research at Allerton?
I think for areas where I suppose farm income is perhaps not as robust as it might be, then there will probably be easier opportunities and easier wins to take the Pontbren type approach. But bluntly, to try and I am trying very hard, with Graham gets involved as well, and there are a number of other people and organisations trying. But to get large estates, particularly in the Upper Thames catchment, to sign up to this kind of approach is very, very difficult. A lot of the estates are managed at arm's length from their owners, quite often by large agri conglomerates, quite often remote from the area, and the owners often are not particularly interested in farmland. They look at it as, and I'm being blunt, they look at it as a cash cow to fund their other enterprises and perhaps to keep some of the parkland and so on well funded. So they are only going to come on board if the bottom line stacks up, which is why I think we have to use all of those new countryside stewardship options, plus some kind of straightforward income model, which may include things like fruit, nuts, firewood. I have this vision, and it's a daft vision I'm sure, of a ribbon of woodland running across a contour either side of a catchment, and somebody within the area then taking advantage of all those small strips within the diverse farm enterprises to make an individual business. So maybe fruit pressing, nut harvesting, firewood, but all of those bits linking together and giving several people a living. I have grave doubts that will ever happen. I think a lot of interested smaller farmers will sign up, but I think a lot of the big boys will duck it. And the only way you can make them come on board is if it stacks up financially. And I think that's sad, but I think it's true.
I think this figure, if I can just interject there, this figure of the soil is worth up to £100 a tonne, and we're losing, in your project, you measured half a tonne per hectare per year. I mean, it's quite a large amount of money, and it comes with that crop resilience against dry and wet times. So is it a case of emphasising those figures more, and us as farmers going home talking to the other people in our catchment are saying, do you know that this is actually having a big knock-on effect? Can we be doing more of that?
If I can just add to what Vaughan said, I'm just picking up the point there. I can't remember now what the statistic is for the millions of tonnes of soil that are lost every year of agricultural land. 75% of the sediment in our rivers comes from agricultural land, and all of that is a resource that really needs to be staying on the land. So that's an enormous loss of an almost irreplaceable resource, but also a significant impact on the watercourses that receive that sediment. So that's just one reason, I think, why the sort of lessons from Allerton and Pontbren, etc., need to be spread and actually implemented more widely. Arguably, there's a case for every farm of any significant size should have some sort of surface water catchment plan. They should understand how water behaves on their land and how it runs off and what it takes with it in terms of soil and nutrients and pesticides, and have a plan to ameliorate and attenuate that and ensure that they don't lose water unnecessarily and they don't cause problems further down the catchment. And if we had that sort of approach at a landscape, at a catchment scale, I think it would make a real difference to catchment runoff characteristics and loss of resource and impacts on receiving watercourses. But I think there's one point Julian made which I think needs addressing, because I think there's a real debate about this, and this was the contention that if we can just get land use sorted out, if we can have a much more sustainable approach to land use, it'll deal with all our flood risk issues and it'll deal with all our drought issues. And I think it's complacent to think that. And I'm an ecologist and I would love that to be the case. But the reality is that a lot of the flood risk in this country in terms of the economic damage is obviously in built up in urban areas. And these aren't areas that wouldn't get flooded if we had a naturally functioning catchment. And the reason for that is that these are areas where we've got property in the floodplain. The floodplain is doing its job. It's taking floodwater. There just happens to be lots of houses there. And the reality is that there will always be an event, a big enough flood event, a big enough rainfall event that will cause that floodplain to do what it does, i.e. take floodwater. And if your house, your property, your business, etc. is in that floodplain, it's going to get hit, no matter how well the catchment is functioning. So I don't think we can rule out at all the need for specific schemes to try and deal with flood risk, and we need the most sustainable and environmentally acceptable schemes as possible. But good land use management and good attenuation should mean that those schemes become more of the exception rather than the rule, that the size and scale of those schemes are less, and that we actually can work in partnership with land use managers to ensure that we've got a collective and comprehensive approach to flood risk management.
Brilliant. Lots of questions lining up now. So could I just take these two together at the back, and then we'll come and pick up Harriet, Robin.
Yeah, within permaculture, swales are often held up as a solution to water management, especially in Australia. Are they really relevant to the UK?
Okay, we'll take the second question as well that was there.
Well, mine wasn't a question, it was a comment really. I'm from the National Trust, and actually in a sense that last from the colleague from Environment Agency sort of said what I wanted to say. What we've done at the National Trust, and we do have the advantage of scale, we are doing in a number of places some landscape scale, catchment scale, experiments rather like, or projects rather like those we've seen described. Killerton in Somerset, Devon, is a very good example. I think that's in partnership with Environment Agency, and up in Ennerdale, precisely to try and achieve that slowing down of the water with all the benefits that have been described. And I suppose I was listening to this debate thinking, but lots of us are doing stuff like this. Why isn't it all kind of pulled together in some common way? Why did no one mention what we're doing? Why don't I know what you're doing? I mean, I'm sure my folks, and some of them are here, do know this stuff. Somehow we seem to be doing it in a rather piecemeal kind of way. And I suppose that is where it's the role of the Environment Agency and DEFRA and the big water companies to kind of pull all this together, because I kind of feel we know some of the answers, and we're all busy working in our silos, if that's the right metaphor, and not really, making the whole greater than the whole greater than the sum of the parts. So it was really just to back we need to pull all the projects that we're all doing together into a really coherent water management policy. And so I sort of come away from this heartened, but slightly disheartened at the fact that we don't know enough about what each other is doing.
I think that's very true, but I think the solutions to, or at least part solutions to a lot of the problems are out there. And I've worked quite a lot for the National Trust, and I know some of the projects you're talking about. But the reality is that it's not the science that's the limiting factor; it's the ability to deliver. And you have hit the nail on the head, because the Trust is a major landowner with an environmental responsibility, has taken the bull by the horn, as have some of the national parks, as have some of the water companies, United Utilities and people have done schemes. But it comes down to the fact, as do all catchment-based approaches, and Graham and I have been involved in a lot of them, and strategic plans for river systems and so on and so forth. You can only deliver if the landowners will let you. And most of the time, on a lot of key areas, there is huge resistance. And that is the thing that stops us. We're not technologically limited, we're limited by opportunity.
Yeah.
Just a brief word on that one. In terms of sharing results and that sort of thing, one initiative that's likely to make a contribution to that is the DEFRA's recently established network of 5 research and demonstration farms linked to landscape scale projects, of which we are one of those and linked to the demonstration test catchments, and that provides a platform for collecting data in a collaborative way and for disseminating and sharing the results of that data collection with people such as yourselves who are doing similar work and improving the dialogue between all those of us who are working on this issue.
If I could add to that, I mean, I fundamentally agree with what my colleagues here have said, and just reiterate that we're up against cultural problems. So, yeah, here and now, very difficult to stop flooding. As long as farmers are being given subsidies to continue allowing water to pour off their land when it rains, it's going to continue to flood. But if some empirical measure were applied against their ability to get their subsidies, and I would suggest that 2 key empirical measures would be capturing rainfall runoff as a part of, as I said in the presentation, some sort of predetermined water balance within the catchment, then absolutely we could dramatically reduce flooding. We could, instead of having to pay ever higher insurance charges for flooding, start to pay lower insurance charges, and so on and so on. So we have to start somewhere, and we have to have a vision of what is possible. A dramatically reduced flood risk and drought risk must be brought about, because we can't afford to carry on this way. What we're actually looking at is really a very clear snapshot of why our economy doesn't work. This is what we're looking at here, a totally dysfunctional use of our landscapes. This is our life support system. It's not just our food, it's our energy that should be coming from here. And yeah, whilst major corporations, frankly, hold the ear of government and the government regulatory agencies, then the corporate interests are going to prevail. And yeah, it's got to stop.
Brilliant, thank you. We're nearly out of time. Last 3 questions. I've already got 3 people booked in. I'm sorry, but the guys will be sticking around after if you want to speak to them. Harriet.
Yeah, hello, I'm Harriet. I'm from the Dartington estate, and I do have a sort of similar experience as the lady from the National Trust, in that I really share your vision, Vaughan, about the right way to manage landscape. And at the moment, I found some funding for some trees from the Woodland Trust, possibly, and some funding from catchment-sensitive water schemes somewhere for doing very specific things. But I need to tie it all together and actually figure out where to put the holes. And make it happen while simultaneously convincing everybody around me that I'm not just a crazy water obsessive. But my question is actually about technology. I was really surprised that none of the speakers touched upon the fact that water can be one of the biggest expenses for any agricultural enterprise, but particularly for beef or dairy herds, and that combining flood retention or water retention features with irrigation systems could potentially be a great way of reducing flooding, but also saving farmers a lot of money. And were there technologies that you know about? In one of the other talks, we've talked about actually how we're starting to look at things on a more micro scale again, so micro dairies, for example. But are there micro technologies for managing your water on a very kind of independent, off the water grid kind of system on the farm that you know of?
Okay, thank you. Quick comments on that?
In terms of storing water, and I guess Graham will agree, I mean, if you want to store water, the gentleman at the back mentioned swales, which are obviously designed to be leaky. They hold water so far and then drip in. They work. There's all sorts of detention systems like that work. They're designed to hold and release slowly. If you want to hold water and then reuse it in terms of irrigation, obviously it's a very big hole to hold a relatively small amount of water in a flood situation. The Pont Bren ponds do some of that, and they use that water for stock drinking. But you would need a very big pond to take the water that's coming off of that land. But in terms of reusing water, there's all the little things we use in photovoltaic cells, pasture pumps, all of those kind of things which are relatively low tech, which do work. But storing water for later irrigation is, you've got to have some very big ponds, some very big systems.
Just quickly add to that. Very, very true. You know, the biggest single agricultural use of water is for spray irrigation. It's about 1% of the total water abstracted that's actually used in agriculture, so it's a very small percentage. But the reality is in certain catchments and at certain times of year, particularly obviously in the summer, the usage locally by agriculture for spray irrigation can be actually quite high and can have detrimental impacts when water levels are generally low, which is why we've encouraged a long time for farmers who use spray irrigation in particular to try and look towards winter storage, which means having a storage facility so they can use that water in the summer, i.e. store it when there's lots of it about so you can use it when there's not a lot of it around in the environment.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll take the very two last questions very quickly because I don't want to hold up the bar opening.
Thank you.
There will be trouble.
It's going to be quick. It's actually a comment on the back of the question, incentivizing farmers to plant trees. I think what we need to do is ensure farmers realise the true value of soil. You've talked about £100 a tonne. That's the sort of value you're going to get if you want a truckload tipping up. As Graham alluded to, that it's essential that soil remains on farms. Whether that's going to be lost via water or wind erosion, we need to educate farmers that the true value of soil to remain on the farm, because as a working farmer myself, I wouldn't like to farm without soil. And if we are losing it on an annual basis, then what's going to be down the road in the future? So I think what we need to do is attach a more meaningful value on retaining soil on farm.
Brilliant, thank you. Any final comments? One word, takeaway messages for everybody?
Well, it's up to each and every one of us to make this better. We all know what the problems are. We all know what the solutions are. These are cultural issues that we're up against, and we're all part of this culture.
Any other comments? Brilliant. Well, I'll close and thank everybody very much for coming along, taking part in a very lively discussion. These guys will be sticking around for a little while, so do come and call them with your further questions. And thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.